Archie's Madhouse, issue 33. In Madhouse, issue 30, Sabrina says the witches were backwards 500 years ago for using potions and charms to attract boys. But she did that. That's hypocrisy on her part. There's no actual story after this, but I'm so glad I got to call this out on being inconsistent with her character. I'd rather her stick to this, but I doubt she will. In Madhouse, issue 33, we see a guy on the bench tell Sabrina that if he had her hexing powers, all its problems would be solved. Shocking me because he actually knows about them. She somehow thinks that if she had Ronald the Rubber Boy's stretching powers, her problems would be solved. I wish she explained that because I don't know what she means. And also, as a witch, she'd be able to use magic to do the same thing he can do anyways. Then again, I'm just assuming this because I'm used to the next two comics and sitcoms, where witches seem to be omnipotent. Apparently in this comic, Sabrina can't give herself stretching powers. Witches do have limits here. I suppose it makes just as much sense as them arbitrarily having magic to begin with. Ronald wishes he could summon genies to do his homework. He also fantasizes about using love potions to have every lady in town crazy about him. So he doesn't respect consent either. It's surprising that he's no better than Sabrina. And he doesn't think ahead enough to realize how taxing it would be to have multiple girlfriends and have to avoid jealous girls fighting over him. These two have a lot in common. Ironically, more so than Sabrina and Harvey. What is it about the earliest of Sabrina and love potions and spells being portrayed as a positive thing? I think it's just a 70s and earlier thing. He also imagines himself getting even with a bully by brainwashing him into thinking he's a punching bag. To be fair, what bullied kid wouldn't want revenge? Sabrina says that if she could stretch her arms, she'd never have to get out of the shower to answer the phone. She thinks she'd always fit perfectly into her clothing, even after 5 Sundays. But she could zap her fat away, and her arms aren't outstretched. I don't get it. How is this the result of stretching powers? She also says she could pass notes all over the classroom. If she's all about hexing people for Dell in this continuity, I guess the only reason she'd like to pass notes for people is because the teacher doesn't want her to, even if it's helping the students, and a student might get caught. Sabrina wants her fairy witch mother to help them both. Why does Ronald want his stretching days to end? They're a part of his identity. They're still useful powers. And if he was able to think, he'd realize he'd missed the advantages of them. I always assumed he was bullied for his weird-looking stretched arms. I'm guessing he's not a witch, since he talks like he doesn't have hexing powers. So he's just some other superhuman type. And apparently that's just a thing that happens on this planet. As if it wasn't predictable already, the fairy godmother snarks that grass always looks greener on the other side. She gives them potions, and Sabrina doesn't like the taste and wants more whipped cream. You'd think she'd cast a spell from a magic book to make it taste good. The next day, they've switched powers. So Ronald uses magic to brainwash his bully into acting like a windmill of all things, and that forces the concept of him hitting him. Why wouldn't he just brainwash him the same way he planned to earlier so he could hit him? He tries to summon a genie to do his homework, and obviously reality ensues because an hour later the genie still hasn't answered any of the algebra questions. The genie believes in stereotypes about his own people somehow, saying that genies suck at algebra. I guess it could make sense that if genies only exist to serve people, they wouldn't have gotten algebra class. We don't know what their lives were like before they were forced into servitude. And they were known as a concept long before algebra class. Wouldn't Ronald be able to tell the genie, "I wish you were great at algebra," and solve his problem right away? So far, none of these consequences are believable. And that's especially unacceptable because we've seen stories where Sabrina's magic backfires on her and where she doesn't think through things. And while she's still too dumb, it's more believable than this. Ronald wants to impress his girlfriend with his power, somehow not thinking ahead enough in all the time he's had that power to realize that she'd just be afraid of him. He changes the channel, and it's upside down, somehow. He wouldn't imagine it that way, so that wouldn't happen. And she's completely casual about the fact that he can do that now. I guess he must have told her about him switching powers with a witch. She already knew about witches. That has to be why she's not freaking out. She lampshades that he's being a nut when he tries to suggest watching the show upside down. Couldn't he just magically turn the TV upside down? But it makes sense that he wouldn't have faith in his magical ability at this point. Wait a minute, did the fairy godmother intentionally make him suck at magic to force him to want to give it back to Sabrina? That was foreshadowed by her immediately assuming that both of them would want things to go back to normal, when realistically he'd never want that. Omnipotence is clearly better than just one ability. Wouldn't he be able to just wish on a genie that he'd have his stretching powers as well? I guess his girlfriend's had issues with him for some time, because she kicks him out and never wants to see him again for being dumb once. He decides to call up Sabrina and ask how she's doing. Thanks to how Ronald was doing, I already know she's gonna somehow screw up getting the phone from the shower. She forgot where she put the phone, and her arm goes all over the place. Why would she forget where she left the extension phone? I guess she goes all over the house with it all the time, and people do forget stuff a lot as they go from focusing on one thing to another. So it's kinda realistic. Except it would be more expected of her to find and put the phone in the room next to the shower before she'd go into it. Specifically so she could reenact her fantasy. The story ends with Sabrina looking horrifying because she needs to be untangled. I can't believe we only saw one consequence to her stretching powers. At least the story saves on padding because it ends there instead of wasting time showing them get back to normal, when we can already imagine how they do it. It ends with the moral of be yourself, acting like changing in general will always backfire. Yeah, as if nobody should ever change anything about themselves. That moral tends to forget that people have flaws. This story was about Sabrina switching powers with the guy with stretchy arm powers, because she somehow didn't realize that because she's omnipotent, she could just give herself those powers. She could forget where the phone is and have that backfire on her without switching powers with him. That was just an excuse for him to discover how bad it could be to have witchcraft. At least it was more interesting to see him suffer through that than Sabrina. She's been incompetent enough. But the same plot could be told with Sabrina. You'd think anybody would know better than to think that a genie could do their homework. And his girlfriend really wanted an excuse to dump on him. How could he be that stupid? In the comedy page after that, someone says to Hilda that mixing this witch's brew is such a chore, and Hilda tells her to get with it and somehow calls her a kid because somehow she's about being up to date now. And she shows her a mixer tool that she can plug in to make brew better. That's smart of her. It makes sense. But it doesn't make any sense that Sabrina's aunt would have green skin when she doesn't. And Della doesn't.